And we're back in the other gym on a Tuesday morning like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your early Tuesday morning here with me in New York. But once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. Well, today's a day where there are all kinds of potential episodes. So I'm just going to have to briefly touch on a few elements and then focus on one thing in particular. 111 years ago today, on November 25th, 1914, one of the greatest baseball players who ever lived, that would be the Yankee Clipper, Joseph Paul DiMaggio, was born. In brief, Joe DiMaggio was not called the greatest living ball player for 30 or so years by accident. He was a phenomenal, did everything well on the field. He was a five-tool player. He hit for power, hit for average. He could run, he could field, he could throw. The Jolter did it all, and he had the famous 56-game hitting streak, and he was with Marilyn Monroe for probably a year or so. There's a certain, I guess, street cred that with that, and who knows. And marriage supposedly ended because of the scene in The 7-Year Itch where the subway grate kind of blows up her skirt. The Jolter wasn't too happy about that, and that it's hard to believe that that's true, but that story didn't come from nowhere. It was somewhat sourced, and a lot of people will swear that was a major crack in their union. So that's 111 years, and Joe DiMaggio died. I mean, it's almost ridiculous. He died after Stanley Kubrick, the day after Stanley Kubrick died in April of 1999, just after the Yankees started a season after they had won the World Series the previous year. So DiMaggio won 9 World Series in his career. You think of it this way: Babe Ruth only won 4, only, with the Yankees. The Jolter won 9, including his final season, 1951, which was Mickey Mantle's first year. But if you go in reverse order, DiMaggio World Series wins with the Yankees 51, 49, 47, 43, 41, 39, 38, 37, 36. That's how you get to 9. And he only lost 1 World Series, which I think was the 1942 World Series, was the only one where the Yankees made the World Series and did not win. So the hit percentage, he was in 10 and he won 9. That's a record that's never going to be broken. I'll go down on that hill. So I also want to point out that the famous musician, multiple Grammy winner, Jimmy Cliff, passed away yesterday. My mother was more of a Bob Marley, like she saw Marley in concert in '78 at Madison Square Garden. But you could argue that without Jimmy Cliff kind of bursting onto the international scene and making reggae a major area of music internationally, I mean, he kind of helped Bob Marley's rise. But Jimmy Cliff passed yesterday at age 81. And you go back 30 years, when I was at New York University Film School, I took a class called Popular Culture and Everyday Life. And it was a good class, very interesting. We didn't see the conventional movies that you would expect because we were focusing on certain aspects of culture and how culture reflected movies and how movies reflected culture, stuff that I've talked about obviously on previous podcasts. But we watched a movie called The Harder They Come, which was a crime film about a young kid in Jamaica, and he is a musician, and he records a couple of songs that are phenomenal. Jimmy Cliff he doesn't play himself, but he basically is a musician in the movie. It's a little like Eminem 8 Mile. It's the same kind of idea. And then he engages in some gang activity, and he's on the run, and then his songs hit the top of the charts. I mean, it's sort of a rags to riches, a reverse Rocky, except for the fact that the police are hunting him down. So, saw that movie in film school. Terrific film. I remember the name of the filmmaker, Perry Henzell, and I think Island Records, that may have been their first soundtrack, was the soundtrack to the movie The Harder They Come. The title track, of course, is famous. And then I remember in 1993, when the movie Cool Runnings was in theaters, and I talked about how 1993 in particular, I believe, is the single best year that Hollywood ever had. Not as far as like groundbreaking movies and the way the movie business started to change, because you could say 1999 for the big budget, big studio films like Star Wars: The Phantom Menace, Austin Powers Part 2. But then you had the Blair Witch Project, and you had films like American Beauty, which I'm not a big fan of, but straddled the line between art and commerce. And you could have a big budget film that plays like an independent film in The Sixth Sense, getting all the Oscar nominations, including Best Picture. 99 was a huge year, but I think that as far as Hollywood product, the highest percentage of masterpiece films was 1993. So the movie Cool Runnings came out in the fall, right around the same time as one of my father's favorite thrillers, Malice, starring Alec Baldwin, Nicole Kidman, and Bill Pullman. Cool Runnings ended up being a bigger hit than Malice. Probably made 10, 15 million more. It was kind of a sleeper hit. And Jimmy Cliff did a recording of I Can See Clearly Now, which I had erroneously thought he wrote, but he did not write. He simply covered that song. And he did a spectacular job, and that jumped to the top of the charts. And I think that year was the year that Jimmy won another Grammy, but I could be wrong about that. But when Jimmy Cliff passed yesterday, and I was kind of going over certain things in his career, and his contribution to the soundtrack of the movie Cool Runnings, which stars John Candy as coach of the Jamaican bobsled team. And I don't remember the name of the real guy that Candy was, kind of portraying. But I remember John Candy being in that film, and the movie was still in theaters when I think it was still in theaters when he passed. So it was all negative. And here I am yesterday. And of course, me being so young, in the fall of 1993, I was still a teenager. And I remember seeing the music video, and I knew who Jimmy Cliff was, but I hadn't started NYU Film School. I didn't know about The Harder They Come. You could get it if you really want. I knew the name, but I didn't know anything else as a teenager about Jimmy Cliff. This was not the internet era. There was no Google. I only knew what I had sort of picked up from the kind of societal perspective. I know that's a cliche, but it's true. In the mostly pre-internet era, information traveled slowly, and in order to find out something, you had to ask somebody and hope that they had an idea of what they were talking about. So I was watching the music video for I Can See Clearly Now from Cool Runnings. And there were clips from the movie, and I gotta tell you, even though I wasn't the biggest Jimmy Cliff fan, I owned one of the CDs that he had put out, and I had the DVD, the Criterion collection of The Harder They Come. I had that for many years until I moved. But watching the music video and the clips from the film with John Candy, I was really upset. I'm sitting there, I'm trying not to cry in an empty house with a cat meowing, it's like ridiculous. But there was something about that really hurt. It got to me that both of these guys were gone. And the reality is that Jimmy Cliff was still in his 40s when he covered I Can See Clearly Now. And I hate to say it's better than any other version, but his version is better than any other version. It's just a spectacular rendition of that tune. I think John Nash was the guy that originally wrote the song. So anytime, for a certain kind of Gen Xer, myself included, anytime we think of John Candy, maybe we laugh. We remember Spaceballs, we remember Who's Harry Crumb, Uncle Buck, Splash, Armed and Dangerous, Home Alone. Maybe we remember Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. And I'm sorry that it took me 9 minutes to get to this, but Planes, Trains, and Automobiles turns 38 today. It was released November 25, 1987. And it is sometimes, when you have a generational gap or divide, even in the era in which we now reside, which is that you can be interested in somebody, as I say, me as a much younger person, knowing a little bit about Jimmy Cliff, but not being able to go like this, and then 2 minutes later I can start Wikipedia-ing information about Jimmy Cliff's career. But there is, for sure, a generation of young people under 35 who know who John Candy is, have seen some of his movies, but maybe don't quite get why it still hurts that he's gone. Why he meant so much while he was alive. It's not one of these things where, well, we really weren't into it, and then when he passed, oh my God. No, everybody loved this guy, with almost no exceptions. I don't know anybody that was not a fan of his. Even in his lesser movies, I gotta tell you, I didn't think Uncle Buck was any good. Sacrilegious though there might be, I think that might be next to Delirious, the worst movie. Well, he also was in Nothing But Trouble. But that was not, I did not like Uncle Buck. I thought it was mean-spirited and had moments of cruelty that weren't necessary. You're trying to make a family-friendly film, and you don't need John Candy, like literally threatening a teenage boy. You don't need to do that. You can do something else. You know, one of the great moments in the history of Siskel and Ebert, they gave two, speaking of 1993, they gave 2 thumbs down to Beethoven's Second. I think it came out around the same time as this is the movies I mentioned, Cool Runnings, Malice, you know, in the fall of 1993. And Siskel and Ebert didn't like Beethoven's Second. They thought the first one was okay. The first one was a big hit, like Marley and Me before Marley and Me, and a great role for Charles Grodin, who people like me also loved to see anytime he appeared on screen. But there were concepts in that movie that should not be in a family film. You have a character that's like a 15-year-old boy threatening a 12-year-old girl. What are you doing that for? You can't do that. The way that Siskel and Ebert described it, there was a line of dialogue where the boy threatens the girl, and he actually says the line, "This is gonna be good." And Ebert really was trying not to laugh the way Siskel was mimicking the film. But Ebert then looks at the camera and goes, "Parents, I want you to explain to your kids what you think the this is." That's a sentence I never heard before. The this. You tell them what you think the this is. Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. Released 38 years ago today. This is a movie that I actually got in on the ground floor. As I had mentioned some of the other ones. You know, like Ransom and Changing Lanes. But it was not a good time in my young life. I was 13. I had been bar mitzvahed the previous year. But my parents had split. And my dear old dad, who was already really old in my estimation, he was, 45? He was 45, he was really, really old. When you're 12 and 13, everyone's old, right? He was living in a little apartment in Plainview. And just thinking of that makes me sick, honestly. But he's living in a little apartment, nice area, nice house, but what the fuck, man? So it was a random Saturday, and I think my mom and sister were actually, they were in St. Croix visiting my mom's parents. Yeah, they were in St. Croix. So it was just me and Dad in Plainview. Now, if we really wanted to be assholes, if my dad wanted to be a wise guy, we could have just gone to the house in Massapequa and hung out there for a couple of days. We didn't want to do that. He said, no, it's okay. Hey, Jerry, you want to go to the movies? Yeah, sure. So Planes, Trains, and Automobiles had been in theaters for probably about a month. And, I mean, I was already a fan of, I thought Steve Martin was a riot. I think I had seen All of Me, and I maybe had seen Three Amigos by that point, but that would have been my experience with Steve Martin. And I'd seen John Candy in Splash. And I don't know if I had seen Summer Rental by that point, but certainly Splash was where I knew John Candy from at the time. So the reviews were good. You know, the ads in the newspapers, funniest film of the year. It's got a lot of heart. 2 thumbs up from the aforementioned Siskel and Ebert. So we went to see it, and I think we went to the Levittown Metroplex, which, you know, it's the kind of thing where if you live in Huntington, that's a hike. But if you're in Plainview, maybe it's 10 minutes from where we were. So we saw the movie, and I loved it. The laughs were in the right places, and I just was kind of, it's not that I wasn't paying attention, but all of the chatter, why is he holding the suitcase, and you know, what's the point of this crazy sized case, like, it wasn't really connecting. I hadn't even turned 14, I was still 13 years old, you know, in December of 1987. I just was in there for the laughs. And I remember really enjoying the movie. My dad liked it a lot, but it was the kind of film, the community atmosphere of everyone in attendance getting into it and laughing. And when I think of movies of my life which I saw in theaters, and this is a kind of a good question to ask yourself, when you've seen comedies which were successful, either commercially, critically, or just some of your favorite comedies, What are some of the best crowds you remember seeing a funny movie with, where you have a sense memory of the community experience of what it was like in the theater that day or that night? So I think of Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, and the number of big laughs where it seemed as if we were all laughing at the same time. There's only really a couple of other movies, comedies, where I think of, or that I think of in this regard, where it felt like everyone in the audience was into it to the same level and laughing the same intensity at the same spots. White Men Can't Jump in 1992, which came out in the spring. Saw that at the movies at Sunrise Mall, Massapequa. That theater lasted about another 6 years. It was out of commission by the middle of 1998. Last movie ever seen at movies at Sunrise Mall was Dark City, the Alex Proyas sci-fi film, kind of the Matrix before the Matrix. But White Men Can't Jump was a movie that also had some serious elements, but was mostly just a laugh out loud kind of a movie, just cracking up the whole way through. And the other film, where it was a fantastic community experience, is not one you necessarily would expect, but the Woody Allen film Manhattan Murder Mystery, same year, 1993, and it was a very particular kind of crowd. It was an older crowd. Most people in the theater were even older than my father, who was 50 at the time, and the laughs were not even spread out. It was frequent. Every 30 seconds, there was something for us to crack up. So the emotional import of Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, it's not that it didn't land for me, I wasn't looking for it. I wasn't interested in any kind of deep philosophical musings about love, about loss, about family, and legitimately the importance of family during the holiday season. Now, I understood these things. If I had been asked questions as a 13-year-old, I could have given you textbook answers, but I had not really lived. The answers would ring hollow. It isn't until you start to understand, get a little bit older, and the synapses start to connect perhaps a little bit differently, and then you get it. So watching the movie again later, in the mid-90s, after John Candy had passed, it's hitting in a completely different way. Because now, it's not just this character of Del Griffith, the shower curtain ring salesman, a brilliant salesman, and a really nice guy who is starved for genuine human connection. And Steve Martin's character of Neal Page, who, a lot of laughs the first time through, but his character is basically, he's a fucking asshole. This guy's not a nice guy. He has so much to be thankful for, and all he does is bitch and moan. And I give Steve credit for playing the character, and yeah, I understand John Hughes directing him, but I feel like there was a way for the character to not be as unlikable for, a half to 2/3 of the film, but they go with it. And it is the performance of John Candy making us care about this guy. Before we know all of his, if you want to use the word secrets, but before we know what his deal is and why he is so gregarious, so overly friendly, we don't get it, and then suddenly we do. And it is difficult to separate the actor, the artist, from the art. And the film is just different, and it will always be different because John Candy died so young. He was 44. Was he even 44? I don't even know I think he may have been only 43 when he passed. But him passing so young, with so many great movies ahead, so many great years ahead, what he would have been capable of, moving through the 90s, and some projects that he had been talked about for, and maybe he was interested, like the Stephen King, the adaptation of Thinner, which supposedly he turned down without comment. It wasn't a big deal. But just the fact that there were people in Hollywood that were looking at him in terms of doing completely different things than what he had done in the first part of his career, which I guess you could say would go from, in terms of movies, from Stripes until Wagons East, which was the film he was making with also the late Richard Lewis when he died of a massive heart attack. But it is difficult for me to see any kind of media with John Candy and not start tearing up. I can't help it. He was just one of those people. And I remember the first time I saw Home Alone, also pre-internet. I saw it, probably early 1991 when it first hit VHS, right? VHS, talk about the Stone Ages. And I didn't know he was in the movie, and it was such an amazing surprise. Holy crap, I didn't know. Well, it was just a cameo. And a lot of people, I don't remember anybody spoiling it for me, so he showed up, and it was like, oh my God, this is amazing. Polka, polka, polka. But Planes, Trains, and Automobiles is not just a funny movie. It does not solely exist to make us laugh. It exists to make us feel and to make us empathize, put ourselves in somebody else's position. And Steve Martin's Neal Page, heel character though he is for huge chunks of the film, he slowly starts to get it, even if he doesn't know all of Del Griffith's, like all the mechanics of Del Griffith's very sad and lonely life. But he starts to understand. Yes, Neal Page has real world problems. He should not have been stuck in New York in the manner that he was. That was not necessary. He didn't need to be there at that meeting. And obviously, at a certain point in time, he could have taken the same meeting at home, in bed with his wife, doing whatever, just as long as he had his camera off. But he didn't really need to be in New York, possibly not getting home for Thanksgiving. That is a legitimate gripe, but so much else that he whines about. Bro, get a little perspective here. Why don't you be a little bit more grateful for the life that you've been able to have, and stop ripping on this poor guy who, yeah, he's hanging around you and you'd rather be by yourself. He's not a bad guy, though. Do you really need to go so hard at him? Do you really need to be so insulting? Is it necessary? I don't know. But you think about the skill of Steve Martin, and this was Steve Martin's kind of glory era, if you will, that he just turned out one great movie and or great performance after another for 5 years. I mean, I don't really think Three Amigos, it's okay. But you look at Roxanne, where he is just an incredible performance as a kind of version of Edmond Rostan's Cyrano de Bergerac. His character's name is C.D. Bales. Like, again, nail meat head. This is not an accidental name. C.D. Cyrano de... Right. C.D.B. C.D.B. And then Planes, Trains, where he plays a really sort of unlikable asshole. Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, Parenthood, phenomenal movie. My Blue Heaven, an unofficial sequel to Goodfellas. Arugula. It's a vegetable. Absolute gold. And then 91, he had literally one of the great years that any actor has ever had. Father of the Bride, family comedy, wholesome, towards the end of the year. He has Grand Canyon, one of the best movies of 1991. I don't know where, it only had like 1 or 2 Oscar nominations. That's Lawrence Kasdan's film, a fucking masterpiece. And Steve plays a dramatic role. And then earlier in the year, in February, he had LA Story. So, big studio comedy, R-rated, LA Story, big studio drama, talking about a lot of big ideas in Grand Canyon for Lawrence Kasdan, Kevin Kline, Mary McDonnell, just an amazing movie. And then Father of the Bride. 3 big movies in 1 year, and Steve just lights it up all 3 times. But Planes, Trains, his character is he's just like a heel character for so much of the movie. And it isn't until he puts it all together towards the end that, without saying it out loud, he doesn't have sides to the audience as he does in Father of the Bride, where he keeps telling us, I'm just going to go with the flow, but then he never does. He just keeps acting like a schmuck, but that's kind of the point of that movie. But the way that Neal Page slowly turns, it's not that he turns good, it's that he turns away from all of the anger and the nastiness. When he begins to realize, well, there's got to be more to this guy. There's got to be more to this guy. And he finds his, if you want to use the cliche, he finds his humanity. But Neal Page finds his humanity when he finally realizes what Del Griffith has been hinting at for the previous hour and a half of movie. This guy is not exactly who he seems to be and who he purports to be. He was at one point, but now he is just a sad and broken down individual who's still very young. Del Griffith is probably about the same age that John was in real life. He's probably supposed to be in his mid to late 30s. But this is a man who was young enough to start fresh. And maybe after the movie ends, maybe Neal Page can help him to reclaim his life outside of just being an incredible shower curtain ring salesman. So Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, although it is a Thanksgiving movie, I think it's a Thanksgiving movie. Yeah, it's a Thanksgiving movie. But it's the kind of film that it plays for all holidays, because the notion of family, to me, the notion of family at Thanksgiving, the notion of family at Christmas. I understand one is an actual religious observance day. I'm not, denigrating anything. But the feel and the spirit of the holiday, to me, are similar. Now, on the other hand, Home Alone, that can't be, if you want to be a schmuck, that's not a Thanksgiving movie. I don't think it translates. I feel like it's easier to translate from Thanksgiving to Christmas than vice versa. Like A Christmas Story, the whole point of that movie is showing us the excitement of the little kid Christmas. That even if you don't get all of the gifts that you want, your mom didn't buy you a Nintendo Entertainment System, the old school box in 1987, but the excitement of wanting it, the excitement of going to Toys R Us, because there's a chance that your dad, don't tell your mom I bought you this. There's always a chance that that's going to happen. And A Christmas Story gets that part of Christmas more correct than any movie I've ever seen. But Planes, Trains, the idea of family, the idea of community, the idea of togetherness, and Home Alone does it too. The scene in the church with the old man, it is not an accident that that's set in a church. You wouldn't do that if it was just Halloween. You could, but it wouldn't have the same import. And, in John Candy's movie career, so many memorable moments, whether it's some of his going off script in Splash, whether it's some of his scenes in Stripes, where I feel like he also was ad-libbing in certain spots, as the bobsled coach in the aforementioned Cool Runnings. I feel like the single best moment in John Candy's career comes at the very end of Planes, Trains, where he somehow manages, without saying anything, he manages to register almost unbearable sadness, pain, but also happiness that he has made a connection with this guy who was really a dick for most of their time together. But now it appears they are going to be friends. And maybe, just maybe, if you truly believe in the spirit of the season and the magic of this movie and the kind of heartwarming aspects, maybe Neal Page will be a lifelong friend to Del. Maybe he'll stay with them for a while until he gets himself together and he can start a new life. There is nothing preventing a brilliant salesman from getting enough of a career to get himself another place on his own and not live in hotels and make deals with, nowadays Airbnb. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but this is a man who is young enough, he can have another life. He can begin again, and he can use what is in him, the kindness, the generosity of spirit, the laughter, the fact that he is very funny on top of everything else. Maybe it's a new beginning for Del Griffith. John Candy gets all of that across with just grabbing his cap and the pain and sadness in his eyes gradually giving way to joy and happiness for his newfound friend and his newfound friend's really beautiful family, who have not welcomed him as a stranger. They have welcomed him as a friend. And it's such a beautiful moment, and there's a lot of cliches about people not getting nominated for Oscars and stuff like that. At this point in history, it would have been a big upset if John Candy had gotten some kind of, acclaim for this film. But it's such good work the whole way through. It's kind of difficult to explain. You really do have to see it. And with everything I said, all of the other stuff that goes into it now, with the fact that he's been gone, almost 31 years. But nobody will ever forget him. And this movie is a big part of why Generation Xers such as myself, why he makes us cry. Because he was so young when he was cut down. And the recent documentary, I Like Me, that's of course a line from the movie I Like Me, my wife likes me, and then all of the psychology of even that line when you think about what it means in total. But John Candy was somebody who, from a certain point of view, as big a star as he was, he kind of was hurt by the system and the way Hollywood operates. That if he had continued, because in the mid-'80s you can see that he had lost a lot of weight, and the movie Armed and Dangerous, which was filmed, I love that. I mean, that's one of the most inappropriate films in history. I don't think that could be made today, at least not the way that it was. Like, everybody gets, it's one of the most offensive films, but it's, you know, equal opportunity. Everybody gets destroyed in that movie. But John had lost a lot of weight. And you look at him, you compare his presentation in Armed and Dangerous to Planes, Trains. He looks a lot bigger in Planes, Trains, and it was not shot, maybe it was not even a year. I don't know the mechanics of, nowadays we would know these things. But he was somebody who maybe didn't take as good a care of himself, but part of it was, unfortunately in Hollywood you had people like Charles Lawton, bigger actors or actresses, Richard Griffiths if you want to be more contemporary, and you just hope that an individual is not hurting their health long term, and you hope that there is a long term. And that's the kind of tragedy of John Candy, that he passed. He was 8 years younger than I am now. And what an amazing career, what an incredible run of great films and great performances, just from Stripes up on through Cool Runnings. Rest in peace to Jimmy Cliff, a trailblazing, pioneering musician. Rest in eternal cinematic paradise to the great John Candy.